Good morning. Today I was asked by my colleagues from our Initiative on International Security to share some of my views on the events that we're witnessing that are unfolding before our eyes. It is not an exaggeration to say that we now live in a different era, and the consequences of these events will be visible and will have grave implications on all of us for many decades. I would not compare this situation to the Cold War. There are many important differences. The absence of ideological conflict between the West and Russia, the important change in the distribution of forces, the balance of forces, and much more serious danger of nuclear escalation between the two countries in view of this changing balance. So on the one hand, I'm rather surprised, in a way astonished, that we find ourselves in this situation and that the leaders of the world seem to be driven by emotions, in a way extremism that has brought us to this escalation. We don't have any examples of a peaceful world that is built on the premise of isolating, humiliating, ignoring the interests of one of the great powers. This has never happened, and it is surprising that one has to explain that to the analysts and those people who are in power today. The process of alienating, humiliating, and antagonizing Russia is a long process. It's taken approximately 25 years. And the idea that this is all a consequence of the personality of the Russian president it doesn't hold water. These conflicts were born long before Putin came to power, so we see a world order, an attempt to establish a new world order that is based on domination of one group of powers, which, as history tells us, has never worked. Another reason why this situation is surprising is that this continuing escalation between the West and Russia and the threat and the prospect of including Finland and Sweden gives one the impression that the leaders on both sides, they're just kind of upping the ante, as they say, or doubling down, which means instead of stepping back and trying to stop this very dangerous escalation, they're only intensifying it. These are, sadly, people who are driven by emotions. They lack wisdom and foresight and restraint, all those things that prevented similar events from unfolding during the Cold War. Sadly, we have a different generation of leaders. Security dilemma is one of the very simple, elementary concepts in international relations. It's a Western concept, by the way. It was described in the 50s by a German political scientist. It is interesting that the leaders in both Russia and the West seem to be caught in this dilemma without realizing it, perhaps. So now we see that Finland and Sweden are trying to join NATO in an attempt to increase their security, and that is immediately countered by Russia, that declares that they will become a target for Russian nuclear weapons. So the spiral of escalation continues, and no one seems to have the will or the wisdom or the reason to stop this from happening. The idea that we will have a more secure world when one alliance continues expanding towards another, and if we can consider the Russian-led alliance an alliance, which it is, that runs contrary to everything we know, to international politics, international history, and it's sad that the consequences of these events, again, they will have serious implications for not just Russia and the West, but for all those countries and all those people who live on the periphery of this new confrontation, including the Caucasus. What we have seen in the Caucasus recently, the war in Georgia, the war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, is also a direct consequence of this dismantling of the common European security architecture. It is continuing to produce tensions, conflicts, and victims all around the Russian the former Soviet Union and in other regions of the world. So it is quite disheartening to see that this escalation is continuing. Turning now to some of the events that we have witnessed in Kazakhstan, one of the former Soviet republics. It seems that the government has heeded to the voices of the opposition, and there is an attempt to increase the legitimacy of the Kazakh regime, to start sharing political power, to reform the party that is in power today. There is talk of some social programs, redistribution of resources, some social aid to students, to families, to those who need it most. There is an intention to take on corruption, which is one of the main, probably one of the main reasons why we've seen the recent events in that republic. So clearly the government has reacted to what happened, and hopefully these measures will lead to increased stability and increased legitimacy in that republic, and perhaps in some others. Overall, overall, looking at what's happening in the world, one cannot help sharing this feeling of disappointment, great disappointment. It seems that we have lost a historic opportunity to build a stable world with a common security system. What we thought was going to happen in the 90s, when things seemed to be much more stable, much more peaceful, and before this unfortunate obsession with dominating, unilaterally dominating the international agenda and unilaterally expanding military alliances. Before that obsession took root. In conclusion, all I can say is that hopefully one day, soon enough, hopefully, the leaders of the West and Russia will realize where these events may lead, and they will hopefully understand that they need to step back, exercise restraint and wisdom. My final point is that we have a real danger of a nuclear war. If you listen to some American analysts, Russian analysts, given the clear predominance of NATO and the West in terms of conventional weapons, Russia has already hinted and may be tempted to use at least tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine, especially if it's faced with the prospect of defeat, and increased Western military assistance. It may be tempted to use tactical nuclear weapons. Both parties are now in a position where they have nothing to lose. So it is a very dangerous escalation indeed, with the prospect of a nuclear war. That is what we're facing, and all I can say is that one can only hope that the leaders in the West and Russia realize where we stand, and we don't have another Cuban Missile Crisis, but this time with a tragic outcome.